The emperors are no longer as attentive as they once were. The Manchu men no longer so concerned with physical discipline, with sharpening their martial skills. And so on this spring morning in 1853, in the walled city of Nanjing, a little over 700 miles to the south of Xianfeng's palace, as the rebels, chosen by a different heaven, smash through the outer walls of the city and shout to the civilians to show them the way to the devils, as they push through the inner Manchu city, climbing over one another to scale the wall that encircles the isolated population within. As they do this, the men who count among the 20,000 or so Manchus living inside the garrison do not take up their weapons, but instead only throw themselves to the ground and beg for pity. The rebels slaughter them like animals, and then their wives, and all of their daughters and sons. Part 1. Twilight. Chapter 1. The Preacher's Assistant. Hong Kong in 1852 was a diseased and watery place, a rocky island off the southern shore of the Qing Empire, where the inhabitants lived in dread of what one described as the miasma set free from the ground, which was everywhere being turned up. A small British settlement sat between the mountains and the bay, but the emerald and sapphire glory of the scene belied the darkness below the surface, leaving the concentration of godowns, military barracks, and trading firms along the colony's nostalgically named central streets, the Queen's Road, Wellington Street, Hollywood Road. One could find the grandest vistas in the gravel paths that led up the coast into the hills. But the European settlement soon gave way to scattered Chinese houses among fields growing rice and sweet potatoes, unchanged in the decades since the British took the island as their prize in the Opium War. Some of the wealthier merchants had built opulent mansions in those hills, with terraced gardens commanding a view of the harbor and town. But as though their builders had strayed too far from the protection of the settlement, the inhabitants of those houses sickened and died. Marked as homes of fever or death, the ghostly manors sat silent and abandoned, their empty gaze passing judgment on the settlers below. One of those settlers was Theodor Homberg, a young Swedish missionary with a thin chin-strap beard that set off his delicate, nearly effeminate features. He was blessed with a lovely voice, and in his youth in Stockholm, he had sung together with Jenny Lind, the Swedish nightingale. But while Lind went on to conquer the opera halls of Europe and America, bringing suitors such as Frederick Chopin and Hans Christian Andersen to their knees along the way, Homberg's life took an entirely different path. His strong tenor found its destined outlet in preaching, and in 1847, he left his native Sweden to sail to the opposite end of the world, to this malarial colony of Hong Kong, with the sole purpose of bringing the Chinese to their knees after a different fashion. Theodor Homberg might well have lived his life in obscurity, for his proudest accomplishments meant little to anyone beyond a small circle of Protestant missionaries. He was one of the first Europeans in his generation to brave the Chinese countryside, leaving the relative safety of Hong Kong to preach in a village outside the Chinese trading port of Canton, 100 miles up the Pearl River, though for health reasons he finally returned to the colony. He was also the first to learn to speak the dialect of Hakka, or guest people, a gypsy minority thickly populous in South China. All of that might have meant little to anyone in the world outside, except that one day in the late spring of 1852, one of his converts from the countryside brought a guest to meet him, a short, round-faced Hakka named Hong Rengan, who had a remarkable story to tell. The strangest thing about this Hakka, Homberg recalled from their first meeting, was how much he already seemed to know about God and Jesus.